What do you think are the strengths and weaknesses of Finnish basketball at the pro level?
At the pro level, and we talked about girls' side, men's side, or in general?
General.
In general. I would think it might, one possibility is the diversity in thinking, so to speak, or methodology in offensive attack, and I think somewhat defensive attack. I think there's a lot of mapping similarities with other teams, other coaches' strategy towards playing man-to-man defense. I think it's heavily used, but I'd say that, to say the least, pretty much. My main thing is the defensive part, just because when I went through this whole KBT qualification, you have to kind of show what strategy you use in your club or in your team. And of course, some coaches were professionals, some coaches were youth. I'm a youth coach at the time. And we use a lot of the zone aspect. And I think for us, it was based because the offensive team had trouble shooting the ball, and we were a little bit smaller, so the speed and physical difference was an advantage for the other team. So if we were in a more set position, then we could kind of offset that advantage. But the challenge towards me for doing this was, does it actually teach overall defense? And I was thinking that zone is kind of something that you get to teach man-to-man and the zone principles all in one. And so I look at defense as something that should be a little bit more diverse, the strategy through the rhythm of a game, changing the pace of the game.
Back in the day, what first brought you to Team Componenta?
Wow, that's an interesting story. My agent, at the time, I was sitting in Chicago, and I had first gone to France and played. Didn't really like the situation there, was really eager to do, the next step, and he said Finland, and at the time I had no idea where Finland was or what to expect, and I looked it up and saw where it was, and saw some similarities in Chicago with the weather and things like that, and I jumped on the flight and I was here. Getting off the plane, being met by the coaches and the management, having the apartment ready. I think I had some salary at the time that was immediate. I just felt really welcome in Karkila.
Yeah.
And throughout the season, that was kept with the fans and how they treated me. It was really a good experience there.
Did you have a culture shock when you came here?
Not really cultural shock. At the time, it seemed like some Finns were still having a culture shock to have somebody like me in the town and stuff. But in Chicago, I kind of grew up in the suburbs. I went to a predominantly white high school. So for me, it was pretty easy to just kind of transfer over. The unsettling part was the darkness in the winter time. And then there is sort of, in the beginning, coming anywhere, normally there's a little bit of shyness, but it almost seemed like it was a little bit extra here in Finland and Karkila. But other than that, it was great.
Okay. Basketball is like really tolerant game and everything, but have you faced any prejudice coming from abroad here or in other European countries where you play?
If you look at prejudice as far as color is concerned, it's my experience. I haven't had anything that was like within the team or any coaches. Nothing really from the fans in any of the countries that I've been in. It had never been a problem to me, and I was so focused in on playing and performing, and if something was said or whatever, I never even heard it. But for me personally, I haven't had any racial experiences. Now there are some situations where you go to a bar and you have somebody who might be drinking. They might say something, but it has never been any violent thing or anything that's scarred me emotionally. But Just small stuff, nothing worth mentioning.
So you would say basketball is like an open game for all?
It's an open game for all. You know, I've been in situations where somebody wouldn't get a chance to talk with me, or I would talk with them.
Mm-hmm.
But because, hey, I'm a tall guy, or they might know somebody who's playing basketball, or there might be basketball on the TV, then there's a communication that's opened up just because of the sport.
Yeah.
And I tell that to the young kids I'm coaching, like this little orange ball, you know, you have to respect it, because look what I've been able to do with it, look what others have done with it, and this is what you can possibly do.
How do you think, or how do you see the Finnish basketball has developed since you came to Karkkila till like today?
The skill level has increased, I think, not just on its own or through time and evolution of more people and those things, but when you have somebody like Lauri Markkanen who was coming up, you had young inspiring players who started to envision the NBA or the NCAA. There was a change there, and that probably happened before I was even aware to start looking and analyzing it. I didn't really look at it too greatly until I was coaching, my third or fourth year in Porvoo. I started to look at how it's changing. It's drastically changed. And it's funny, I look at the skill level on a global scale. When I was playing in a lot of places in Europe, you had countries that, rumored they were power countries, or, the league was so hard. Mm-hmm. And then I would get there and play, and then I would come somewhere like here and play, and I would think they're almost similar. Okay. But because of how the national team was performing, so to speak, mm-hmm. or the salaries that were given at the time, they didn't have the same hurrah about basketball in Finland. Mm-hmm. But the level has, to me, been pretty high overall on the professional side. I think it's gotten much better in the sense that the hometown players, Finnish players, years before they would have less players from America, more Finnish players, but those players weren't necessarily at the level to play. But I think that helped the performance as it went along, because those guys got to have experience that they wouldn't generally get mm-hmm. sooner. So overall, I think it's gotten better, and it's getting better. There's more kids in basketball. There's more kids who are in the gym after hours when the coaches are away, and those are the things that it takes to make it overall.
If I understood it correctly, that having somebody from abroad playing in a Finnish teams will develop also the Finnish players.
It can happen. Mm-hmm. It can happen negatively and positively. I'm sure there's been many cases where guys can negatively influence, but overall, there's an expectation when an American player comes. We kind of have lived it in a different passion, because in America, if you want to go to university, you're one of 12 guys. Universities cost hundreds of thousands. It's very important, so the focus is a lot different than here in some instances. So, there's an expectation that you're being watched. We're sort of the guideline of how basketball is, how an athlete should be, whether, like we're some god or something. I don't think we are, but because of the perception, it's really key. And I think it influences greatly. It does a lot more than most guys recognize. At my point in certain stages of my career, I had no idea how much influence from the coach, even to top players, to the bottom players, to the fans, to the little kids, them watching you walk in the gym, walk home, in a grocery store, what you eat. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's really kind of a microscope, and it's in a good energetic nature. So, more guys need to take heed to it and understand it. And I think they are, because of, the interface with internet and all that. More guys are seeing how things are done and what other people are experiencing. And so hopefully that's getting better mm-hmm. as the years go.